Her husband humiliated her in front of his family. She returned with a secret. For 11 years, Clara Whitmore had learned how to smile without showing pain. It was not a skill she was proud of, but it was one she had perfected in the mirrored hallway of the Whitmore family estate, where every dinner required polished shoes, quiet hands, and the kind of grace that made cruelty look like tradition. She smiled when her mother-in-law corrected the way she held a wineglass. She smiled when her sisters-in-law spoke over her, as if her voice were a draft slipping under a door. She smiled when her husband, Andrew, praised other women for their ambition, and then looked at Clara as though she had wasted hers by staying loyal to him. On the night everything broke, the Whitmore family gathered for Richard Whitmore's 70th birthday. Richard was Andrew's father, a retired shipping magnate whose name still opened doors in Boston, even though his hands shook too much now to sign a check without assistance. The estate sat high on a hill above the dark river, its windows glowing like a warning. Outside, rain tapped the glass. Inside, candles burned in silver holders, servers moved without sound, and Clara stood near the dining room entrance with a gift wrapped in dark blue paper pressed against her chest. She had chosen it herself, a first edition of a sea journal Richard had mentioned once in passing. He had talked about it years ago, before the illness made him quiet, before his family began treating him like a figurehead instead of a man. Clara remembered because she always remembered the small things. She remembered birthdays, allergies, favorite songs, the way Andrew liked his coffee before he decided coffee was too ordinary and switched to espresso. Remembering was how she loved people. It was also how she survived them. Andrew arrived late, as usual, with his phone still in his hand and a smile he saved for guests. He was handsome in the careless way of men who had never been forced to wonder if they were enough. Dark suit, silver cufflinks, clean jaw, eyes bright with confidence. He kissed his mother's cheek, shook his father's hand, and placed one hand at the small of Clara's back only when he noticed the photographer in the corner. "Try not to look so nervous," he murmured without moving his lips. Clara kept smiling. "I'm not nervous. You always look like you're waiting to apologize." She lowered her eyes because answering him would only start a scene, and Clara had spent years believing peace was worth the price of silence. They took their places around the long mahogany table. Andrew sat beside his father. Clara sat beside Andrew, though somehow she felt miles away from him. Around them sat the rest of the Whitmore family. Margaret, Andrew's mother, elegant and sharp as cut crystal. Evelyn and Brooke, Andrew's sisters, both married to men who laughed too loudly at money. 2 cousins from New York. And Andrew's old college friend, Nathan, who had become the family attorney and looked at every conversation as though it might later become evidence. Dinner began with polite compliments and expensive soup. Clara listened more than she spoke. Margaret discussed a charity gala. Evelyn complained about her son's private school. Brooke showed everyone photos from a trip to St. Bart's and mentioned 3 times how spontaneous it had been. Andrew held court easily, describing a new real estate acquisition downtown, the restoration of a historic building that would become luxury apartments. Everyone admired him. Everyone always did. Then Margaret turned to Clara with a smile that never reached her eyes. "And what have you been doing lately, dear? Still arranging flowers for that little community center?" Clara set down her spoon. "I help with their fundraising now. They're expanding the after-school program." "How sweet," Brooke said. "It must be nice to have hobbies." "It's not a hobby," Clara replied gently. "They serve more than 200 children a week." Andrew chuckled, and the sound was small but cutting. Clara likes to feel useful. The table laughed lightly, not because it was funny, but because Andrew had given permission. Clara looked down at her hands. The gift for Richard rested on the sideboard behind her, still unopened. Richard cleared his throat. "Usefulness is underrated." The laughter stopped. His voice was thin, but it still carried some old authority. Clara looked at him with gratitude. He gave her a small nod, then stared into his wine as if speaking had exhausted him. For a while the dinner recovered. The servers brought roasted vegetables and lamb with rosemary. Glasses were refilled. The rain outside became heavier, rolling against the windows. Clara tried to breathe through the ache in her ribs. She told herself it was nothing. It was always nothing. A little comment, a little laugh, a little reminder that in this family she had a seat at the table but not a place in their hearts. After dessert, Margaret asked everyone to move into the drawing room for champagne and gifts. The room smelled of cedar, old books, and money. Richard sat in his leather chair near the fireplace, wrapped in a cashmere blanket despite the heat. One by one, the family presented gifts. a rare bottle of scotch, a custom watch, a framed photograph from the old harbor office. Andrew gave his father a sleek folder tied with ribbon. "What's this?" Richard asked. "Something meaningful," Andrew said, smiling at the room. "A proposal for the foundation in your name, the Whitmore Maritime Heritage Fund. I've already arranged the initial paperwork." Margaret touched her pearls, delighted. Andrew, how thoughtful. Clara knew about the foundation. She also knew Andrew had created it to improve the company's public image after a labor dispute in one of their warehouses, but she said nothing. She stood near the edge of the room with her own gift, waiting. Richard opened the folder slowly. His eyes moved over the pages. "You did this without asking me." Andrew's smile stiffened. "It's in your honor." "My name is not a decoration," Richard said. An uneasy silence followed. Andrew's face hardened, then softened for the guests. "Of course, Dad, we can discuss details later." Clara stepped forward, hoping to shift the mood. "Richard, I brought something small." Before she reached him, the bottom of the wrapping paper caught on the brass edge of a side table. The paper tore slightly. A few people turned. Clara stopped, embarrassed. Andrew sighed so loudly that everyone heard. "Clara." "It's all right," she said quickly. But he took the gift from her hands and held it up. "This is exactly what I mean." Clara blinked. "What?" He looked around the room, the champagne making him bolder, his earlier embarrassment looking for a victim. "Everyone here puts effort into honoring my father properly, and Clara brings a used book wrapped like something from a thrift store." The room went still. Clara felt the blood leave her face. "It's a first edition," she said quietly. "He mentioned it once." "A first edition of what? Some dusty sailor diary?" Andrew laughed. "Do you know how this looks?" Richard leaned forward. "Andrew, stop." But Andrew had found his stage. He held the torn package in one hand and gestured toward Clara with the other. "No, maybe it's time we stop pretending. Clara has spent 11 years acting like quietness is virtue. It isn't, it's emptiness. She has no ambition, no presence, no understanding of what this family represents. She smiles, she volunteers, she remembers birthdays, and somehow she thinks that makes her remarkable." Clara stared at him. Every candle, every face, every glimmer of rain on the window became painfully clear. There are moments when humiliation is so complete it feels almost calm, as if the soul steps away from the body because the body cannot hold that much hurt. Margaret whispered, "Andrew, that's enough," but she did not stand. Evelyn looked at the carpet. Brooke sipped champagne. Nathan watched with the careful stillness of a lawyer. Andrew turned back to Clara. "You want to know the truth? You were never a partner in this marriage. You were a mistake I was too polite to correct." The words did not echo, they sank. Clara heard the fire crackle. She heard Richard's labored breathing. She heard her own heartbeat, steady and strange. She did not cry. That surprised everyone, perhaps most of all Andrew. She simply reached out and took the gift from his hand. The torn wrapping paper slid away, revealing the old leather book beneath. She walked to Richard and placed it gently on his lap. "It is the journal of Captain Elias Moore," she said, her voice low but clear. "Printed in 1891. Your grandfather quoted from it in a newspaper interview after the fire at Pier 6. You told me once you had searched for it when you were young." Richard's mouth parted, his hands trembled as he touched the cover. "I did." Clara nodded. "Happy birthday." She turned then, not to Andrew, but to the room. "Thank you for dinner." Andrew gave a disbelieving laugh. "Clara, don't be dramatic." For the first time in 11 years, she did not obey the tone in his voice. She walked out of the drawing room, down the mirrored hallway, past the portraits of Whitmore men who had built fortunes and destroyed smaller lives to do it. Andrew followed her halfway. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded. Clara paused at the front door. Rain flashed silver beyond the glass. "Home." "This is your home." She looked at him then, really looked. Not at the handsome face, not at the name, not at the husband she had kept trying to find underneath the man who kept hurting her. "No," she said, "it never was." She stepped into the rain without an umbrella. By morning, the story had already changed inside the Whitmore house. Margaret called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. Evelyn said Andrew had been under stress. Brooke texted Clara 3 champagne glass emojis and wrote, "You know how family can be." Andrew did not call at all. He sent a message at 9:17 a.m. "Don't make this bigger than it is." Come back when you're ready to be reasonable. Clara sat in a small hotel room downtown with wet shoes by the heater and read the message 3 times. Then she deleted it. She had slept only an hour, maybe less. The humiliation kept replaying in fragments, Andrew's hand lifting her gift, the polite horror on the faces around her, the phrase mistake I was too polite to correct. But beneath the pain, something else had awakened. Not anger exactly. Anger was loud and temporary. This was quieter, colder. It felt like a locked door, opening in a room she had forgotten she owned. At noon, she called a number she had not used in years. The man answered on the second ring, Miss Vale. Clara closed her eyes at the sound of her old name. Hello, Mr. Adler. There was a pause. I wondered when you would call. You knew I would. I knew your father. He believed patience was powerful until it became self-punishment. Clara looked at the gray city beyond the hotel window. I need to discuss the trust. Of course, the attorney said, and the shares. Yes, Clara said, her voice did not shake, all of them. Before Clara was Clara Whitmore, she had been Clara Vale, only child of Thomas Vale, a quiet investor who disliked attention almost as much as he understood money. Thomas had never lived like a rich man. He drove an old station wagon, cooked breakfast every morning, and wore sweaters with repaired elbows. When Clara was young, she thought they were ordinary. Only after he died did she learn that her father had spent decades buying pieces of companies other people overlooked, including a significant private stake in Whitmore Holdings through a chain of investment entities, no one connected to the Vale name. He had left everything to Clara, but with conditions. The largest assets were locked behind a trust until her 35th birthday, or until she chose to activate them through formal declaration. Her father had explained it in a letter she read at 24, newly grieving and newly engaged to Andrew. He wrote that wealth could be a tool or a trap, and that he wanted Clara to know who loved her before anyone knew what she owned. Clara had never told Andrew. At first, the secret felt protective. Later, it felt impossible. Every year, as Andrew grew more dismissive and his family more cruel, Clara told herself revealing the truth would only poison what remained. She wanted to be chosen without money. She wanted love to be pure. She wanted, foolishly and faithfully, for Andrew to wake up one morning and see her. Now she understood that some people do not fail to see you. They refuse to see you because your smallness serves them. 2 days after Richard's birthday, Clara met Mr. Adler in a private conference room above Beacon Street. He was thinner than she remembered, with white hair and kind eyes that had witnessed too many inheritances turn into wars. He placed a folder before her and did not rush while she read. Your father's holdings have grown, he said, substantially. Clara turned a page, her breath caught. The number looked unreal. This can't be correct. It is. And Whitmore Holdings. Through Vale Harbor Capital and 2 subsidiary vehicles, you control 28% of voting shares. Not a majority alone, but enough to block several actions and force disclosures under the current bylaws. In addition, your father acquired debt instruments tied to 3 of their redevelopment projects. Clara sat back. Andrew doesn't know. No one in the Whitmore family knows. Your father was careful. Why would he invest in them? Mr. Adler folded his hands. He believed the company had value but poor stewardship. He also believed Richard Whitmore was an honorable man surrounded by ambitious heirs. Clara thought of Richard touching the old book with trembling hands. He was right about Richard. And the heirs. She looked down at Andrew's name printed in the documents. He was right about them too. Mr. Adler studied her gently. Miss Vale, may I ask what you intend to do? For years, Clara had believed goodness meant absorbing harm without returning it, but sitting in that room with her father's legacy spread before her, she understood something better. Goodness without boundaries is just an invitation for cruelty to become comfortable. She did not want revenge for its own sake. She did not want to destroy Andrew because he had embarrassed her. She wanted truth. She wanted accountability. She wanted every hidden thing dragged into daylight, including herself. I want to know exactly what Andrew has been doing with the company, she said. Mr. Adler nodded once. Then we begin with an audit. The next 3 weeks passed in silence, at least from Clara's side. Andrew called after the first week, irritated rather than apologetic. Clara, this is childish, he said when she answered. She sat on a bench outside the community center, watching children race across the playground with paper crowns they had made in art class. I disagree. You walked out of a family dinner. You embarrassed me. Clara almost laughed. I embarrassed you. You know what I mean? My mother is upset. Dad hasn't spoken much since. Everyone thinks you overreacted. What do you think? He exhaled. I think you are making a marriage problem into a public performance. Our marriage became public when you humiliated me in front of your family. I had too much champagne. You were sober enough to mean every word. A silence. Then Andrew lowered his voice, choosing softness as a tactic. Come home, we'll talk. I'll tell them I was harsh. Not I'm sorry, not I was wrong, I'll tell them. Clara watched a little boy hand his broken paper crown to a girl who repaired it with tape. No. His voice cooled. No. I'm not coming back. You don't have anywhere else to go. For a moment, the old fear rose. Then Clara remembered the folder in Mr. Adler's office. She remembered her father's letter. She remembered rain on her face and the relief of leaving. You'd be surprised. Andrew gave a short laugh. What does that mean? It means you should speak to your attorney. She ended the call and sat very still, not because she regretted it, but because freedom had weight. It pressed on her shoulders like responsibility. Andrew filed for divorce first. He did it to control the story. Within the family, he presented himself as the abandoned husband of an unstable wife who had always been insecure about fitting in. Margaret called Clara twice and left messages wrapped in velvet poison. Darling, no one wants ugliness. Think carefully. A woman in your position should value dignity. Clara did not return the calls. Nathan, the family attorney, sent a formal letter suggesting an amicable separation with reasonable support and confidentiality provisions. Clara read the document in Mr. Adler's office. The settlement offered her a modest apartment, a monthly allowance for 3 years, and a clause forbidding her from discussing the marriage or the Whitmore family publicly. Mr. Adler looked offended on her behalf. They believe you have no leverage. Clara placed the papers down. Let them. The audit began quietly. Vale Harbor Capital requested financial disclosures related to specific holdings. Whitmore executives delayed. Mr. Adler pressed. A second legal firm joined Clara's side, then a forensic accounting team. Numbers began to tell stories people had tried to bury. Funds routed through consulting agreements. Inflated invoices tied to Andrew's redevelopment projects. Payments to a design firm owned by Brooke's husband. Unusual transfers authorized days before quarterly reports. None of it was simple enough to be called theft in one sentence, but all of it smelled like arrogance. Clara read every report. She learned terms that once would have intimidated her. She asked questions until the lawyers stopped simplifying. She discovered that Andrew was not the brilliant businessman his family praised. He was reckless. He covered shortfalls with borrowed confidence. He used his father's reputation like collateral and treated the company as a mirror for his ego. The downtown redevelopment project he had bragged about at dinner was over-leveraged and vulnerable. One failed approval, one investor withdrawal, one creditor demand, and the whole elegant structure could crack. By the end of the first month, Andrew's confidence began to fracture. He sent flowers to the hotel, white roses because he had forgotten she disliked them. The card said, "We have both made mistakes. Call me." She donated them to the lobby. Then came a longer message. I know you're upset, but lawyers are expensive and unnecessary. We can handle this privately. You know I cared about you. Don't let bitterness ruin your future. Clara stared at the word future. For 11 years, Andrew had spoken about the future as if it belonged to him, and she might be invited to stand nearby. Now, for the first time, he feared she might have one without him. She did not respond. The first public crack appeared in a business journal. The headline was polite, but the meaning was not. Minority investor requests governance review at Whitmore Holdings. Andrew called within minutes. What did you do? He snapped. Clara was in Mr. Adler's conference room, looking at drafts for a shareholder letter. I requested a governance review. You don't own anything. That's not accurate. Another silence, longer this time. What are you talking about? You should ask Nathan. Clara. She heard something new in his voice, not remorse, fear. And yes, who are you working with? My attorney. You don't have the money for this. Clara looked at Mr. Adler, who raised his eyebrows faintly. Andrew, she said, you never asked what I had. You only told me what I lacked. She ended the call. Within an hour, Nathan requested an emergency meeting. Clara agreed, but not at the Whitmore estate. She chose a neutral law office downtown. When she arrived, Andrew was already there, pacing near the windows. Nathan sat at the table with a folder open, his expression tight. Margaret had come too, dressed in cream, carrying fury-like perfume. Clara entered wearing a navy dress and her mother's small pearl earrings. Nothing dramatic, no glittering transformation, no attempt to look like someone else. That was what unsettled Andrew most. She looked exactly like Clara, but without apology. Margaret stood. This has gone far enough. Clara took a seat. Good afternoon to you too. Andrew stared at her. Vale Harbor Capital. And yes, you're Vale Harbor. I control it. That's impossible. It's documented, Mr. Adler said, sitting beside her. Margaret turned pale beneath her makeup. Clara, what kind of game is this? Clara met her eyes. The kind your family has been playing for years. I simply learned the rules. Andrew leaned over the table. You hid this from me. And yes, we were married. And yes, how could you keep something like that secret? The irony was so sharp that Clara almost smiled. You kept contempt in plain sight and called it marriage. I kept my inheritance protected and called it caution. Margaret's voice shook. Do you understand what you're doing? You are attacking this family. No, Clara said. I'm asking what this family has done. Nathan cleared his throat. We should remain focused. Ms. Whitmore or Ms. Vale, your requests are unusually aggressive for a minority position. Are they unfounded? Mr. Adler asked. Nathan did not answer quickly enough. Andrew looked at Clara, as if trying to rearrange her into the woman he understood. Is this because of what I said at dinner? That was the moment I stopped lying to myself, she said. But no, this is because the company's money has been misused, because your father's name has been used to approve things he doesn't understand anymore, because employees lost benefits while executives billed private luxuries as project expenses, because you thought no one quiet could be watching. Margaret sat slowly. You have no idea how business works. Clara turned to her. For 11 years, you told yourself I was simple because it made cruelty easier. But I listened, I learned, and when I didn't know enough, I hired people who did. Andrew's face flushed. What do you want? There it was, not forgiveness, not truth terms. Clara folded her hands. Full cooperation with the audit, withdrawal of the confidentiality clause in the divorce settlement, a fair division of marital property based on accurate disclosures, and Richard removed from any documents signed without independent medical and legal review. Margaret slammed her palm lightly against the table. You will not drag Richard into this. You dragged him into it when you used his name. For the first time, Margaret had no answer. The meeting ended without agreement. Andrew left first, brushing past Clara as though proximity itself offended him. In the hallway, he stopped. You think money makes you powerful, he said. Clara looked at him. No, I think truth does. Money only pays for the microphone. He stared at her for a long second, then walked away. That night, Clara returned to her hotel and finally opened the last letter her father had written before his death. She had read it many times over the years, but grief changes letters, and so does courage. The paper had softened at the folds. Her father's handwriting leaned slightly right, patient and familiar. My Clara, if you are reading this in a moment of confusion, remember that love should make you larger, not smaller. The right people will not need you poor to trust your heart. They will not need you silent to feel strong. You have a gentle spirit, but gentleness is not weakness. A river shapes stone not by shouting at it, but by continuing. She pressed the letter to her chest and cried then. Not for Andrew, not even for the humiliation, but for the younger woman she had been, trying so hard to earn a place in a house that had mistaken kindness for emptiness. The next morning, Richard Whitmore called her. His voice was faint. Clara. She sat up straight. Richard, are you all right? I'm old, not gone. Despite everything, she smiled. I know. I wanted to thank you for the book. I'm glad you liked it. I did more than like it, I remembered myself. Clara closed her eyes. Richard breathed slowly into the phone. Andrew told me you are trying to hurt the company. I'm trying to protect it from what's been happening. I thought so. There was a pause long enough that Clara wondered if he had fallen asleep. Then he said, Your father was Thomas Vale. Her heart jolted. You knew him. Not well, but I knew of him. He once stopped me from making the worst business decision of my life. Quiet man, very sharp. He never told me. He wouldn't have, Richard coughed. Clara, there are papers in my study. Old correspondence, board notes. I kept things because I never fully trusted my own son's appetite. Margaret said it was paranoia. Richard, I want you to have them. The offer stunned her. Are you sure? No, I am tired, but I am not confused. His voice hardened with effort. They used my name. I let them sometimes because I was weak, sometimes because I wanted peace. Peace can become a coward's costume. Don't wear it as long as I did. Clara swallowed. How can I get the papers? I'll ask Henry to bring them. Henry was Richard's longtime driver, one of the few staff members the family treated with something close to respect because he had been there too long to erase. 2 days later, Henry delivered 3 sealed boxes to Mr. Adler's office. Inside were copies of memos, handwritten notes, old meeting minutes, and one flash drive labeled with Richard's shaky handwriting. The documents changed everything. They showed that Richard had raised concerns about Andrew's redevelopment plans months earlier. They showed that Nathan had advised limiting Richard's operational exposure while continuing to use his approval authority for public confidence. They showed that Margaret had coordinated with Andrew to present decisions to Richard after the fact, when reversing them would be embarrassing. Most damaging of all, they showed a pattern of side agreements with vendors connected to family members. Clara's legal team moved quickly. The governance review became a formal demand. The board, long accustomed to treating family matters as private weather, suddenly faced pressure from creditors, minority investors, and insurers. Andrew's downtown project stalled, reporters called, employees whispered. Margaret stopped leaving messages. Then, one rainy afternoon almost 2 months after the birthday dinner, Clara received an invitation to an emergency board meeting at Whitmore Holdings. As a major voting shareholder through Vale Harbor Capital, she had the right to attend. Andrew would be there. Margaret, too. Richard, against medical advice, insisted on attending in person. The meeting took place on the top floor of the Whitmore building, overlooking the harbor where the family fortune began. Clara arrived with Mr. Adler and 2 attorneys. The boardroom was long and glass-walled, with a polished table that reflected faces too clearly. Andrew stood at the far end, speaking in low tones to Nathan. He looked tired. Not humbled exactly, but worn down by consequences he had always believed were for other people. Margaret sat rigid beside him. Richard sat in a wheelchair near the head of the table, Henry standing behind him. When Clara entered, Richard lifted his hands slightly. She went to him. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for trusting me. His eyes moved toward Andrew. Trust is expensive when spent badly. The board chair, a silver-haired woman named Helen Morris, called the meeting to order. Her voice was professional, but her expression revealed exhaustion. The findings were summarized: conflicts of interest, insufficient oversight, questionable authorizations, potential misrepresentations to investors. Nathan objected to phrasing. Andrew argued that all decisions were made in pursuit of company growth. Margaret insisted that family businesses required flexibility outsiders did not understand. Clara listened until Helen turned to her. Ms. Vale, as representative of Vale Harbor Capital, do you wish to make a statement? The room shifted. Andrew looked at her with warning in his eyes. Once, that look would have folded her into silence. Now it only reminded her why she had come. Clara stood. For years, she said, I believed silence was kindness. I believed that if I absorbed enough disrespect, eventually the people around me would recognize loyalty. I was wrong. Silence can protect peace, but it can also protect lies. In this company, too many people stayed silent because the Whitmore name was supposed to be enough. Enough to silence employees. Enough to reassure lenders. Enough to cover mistakes. Enough to excuse cruelty at home and carelessness at work. Andrew shifted. This is personal. Clara looked at him. It became personal when personal arrogance put employees, investors, and your father's legacy at risk. She turned back to the board. I am not here to punish a family for being unkind to me. I am here because unkindness was only the symptom. The disease was entitlement. Decisions were made without oversight because certain people believed they were born deserving trust. Money moved through related parties because they believed no one would question them. Richard's name was used because they believed love meant compliance. It does not. Richard's eyes shone, but he did not look away. Clara placed a folder on the table. Vale Harbor Capital will support immediate independent management review, suspension of executives connected to the transactions under investigation, and protection for employees who cooperate. We will also support Richard Whitmore's request for independent counsel regarding any use of his name, signature, or voting authority. Margaret's lips trembled with rage. After everything this family gave you. Clara turned to her. This family gave me lessons, I'm using them. The vote was not unanimous, but it passed. Andrew was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Nathan resigned as family counsel 2 days later. Brooke's husband's design firm lost its contract. Margaret retreated from public view, calling the decision temporary, disgraceful, and legally questionable depending on whom she was speaking to. The news spread faster than Clara expected. Business outlets framed it as a corporate governance struggle. Social circles framed it as scandal. The Whitmore family framed it as betrayal. But at the community center, Sophia hugged Clara in the kitchen and said, "You look like you can breathe." Clara laughed softly, "I think I can." Divorce negotiations changed after the board meeting. Andrew's attorney stopped speaking in tones of charity. The revised settlement was fair, clean, and stripped of insulting assumptions. Clara did not ask for Andrew's ruin. She did not need to. He was already meeting himself without the flattering mirrors his family had held up for him. Still, Andrew asked to see her. She almost refused, then Richard called. "You don't owe him a conversation," he said. "I know. But if you have one, don't go alone in your heart." That was such a Richard sentence that Clara smiled. "I won't." She agreed to meet Andrew in the public garden where he had proposed 12 years earlier. Back then, the garden had been bright with tulips and possibility. Now it was late autumn. The trees were bare, the fountain drained, the benches damp from morning fog. Clara arrived in a wool coat, carrying coffee she had bought for herself. Andrew stood near the old iron gate, hands in his pockets. For a moment, she saw the young man he had been when they met. Charming, ambitious, attentive in a way that felt like sunlight. He had taken her to small restaurants before he introduced her to his world. He had listened when she spoke about her father, or perhaps he had only waited well. Memory is generous until truth edits it. "You came," he said. "And yes." He looked older, not dramatically, but enough. "I didn't know about your father." "And no. Why didn't you tell me?" She watched a leaf skate across the path. "At first, because I wanted to know you loved me without it." "I did love you." Clara looked at him, maybe, in the way you understood love. He flinched. "That's not fair. Fairness isn't only what feels gentle." He rubbed his face. "I said terrible things that night. And yes, I was angry. And yes, I was embarrassed in front of my father. And yes." He stared at her. "Is that all you're going to say?" "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." His voice cracked slightly, and the sound startled them both. "I don't know how everything got here." Clara's anger softened, not into forgiveness, but into grief. "It got here one small moment at a time. Every joke you let them make. Every time you corrected me in public. Every time I told you something hurt and you called me sensitive. Every dinner where I disappeared beside you. That night was not the beginning. It was just the first time you said the truth loudly enough for me to believe it." Andrew's eyes reddened. "I'm sorry." There it was at last, 2 words, late and small, standing in the cold between them. Clara nodded. "I believe you're sorry now." "Can that matter?" "It matters, but it doesn't change my decision." He looked toward the empty fountain. "Do you hate me?" She thought about it honestly. Hate would have been simpler. Hate keeps a person tied to the fire, but Clara was tired of burning. "No," she said. "I don't hate you. I just don't belong to the version of myself who waited for you to become kind." He swallowed, and the company. The company will survive if it becomes honest. And me. That depends on whether you can. Andrew laughed once painfully. You sound like your father. Clara smiled faintly. I hope so. On the first warm day of spring, Richard asked Clara to visit the estate. She hesitated when Henry called. The house still lived in her body. The mirrored hallway, the dining room, the drawing room where Andrew had called her a mistake. Some places become haunted not by ghosts, but by versions of ourselves we had to abandon there. Only if you want to, Henry said kindly. Clara almost said no. Then she looked at the old sea journal on her shelf, which Richard had insisted she borrow after reading it twice. She said yes. The estate looked different in daylight. Less powerful, more tired. The ivy needed trimming. The fountain near the drive was dry. Henry met her at the door and led her not to the drawing room, but to the garden behind the house, where Richard sat wrapped in a blanket beneath a pale sun. You came, he said. I did. Brave. It's only a house. Richard smiled. Houses remember. She sat beside him. For a while, they watched two sparrows argue in the hedge. Then Richard handed her a small wooden box. What is this? Clara asked. Open it. Inside was a brass compass, old and heavy, its surface scratched from use. It belonged to my grandfather, Richard said. He carried it when he started with one boat and more debt than sense. My father gave it to me when I took over the company. I gave Andrew stock options and arrogance. That was easier than giving him direction. Clara touched the compass gently. Richard, I can't take this. You can. I'm giving it to someone who knows north is not the same as forward. Her throat tightened. You should give it to Andrew. I may give him other things, regret if he's willing, advice if he ever asks, but not this. Richard looked at her. You protected my name when my own family used it. You protected the company by refusing to protect its lies. And you protected yourself finally. That matters. Clara closed the box. I didn't feel brave. Bravery rarely does. Mostly it feels like being tired of fear. The wind moved through the garden, carrying the smell of wet earth and new leaves. Clara thought of the woman who had walked through the rain months earlier with no umbrella and no plan beyond leaving. She wished she could reach back and tell her that the rain was not punishment. It was cleansing. A year after the birthday dinner, Clara returned to the Whitmore estate one last time, not as a wife, not as a guest, but as a buyer. The family had decided to sell. Margaret moved to a smaller house near the coast. Evelyn and Brooke fought over furniture until appraisers made sentiment expensive. Andrew signed his portion from Chicago. The estate, once a fortress of polished judgment, sat empty under a bright October sky. Clara did not buy it for herself. Through the Thomas Vale Forward Fund, she purchased the property and donated it to a coalition of community organizations. The dining room became a training space for culinary students. The drawing room became a library. The mirrored hallway remained for a while, until Sophia suggested covering the walls with student artwork. Clara agreed immediately. On the day the new center opened, children ran across floors where Clara had once been afraid to make sound. Parents gathered beneath chandeliers that had watched generations of Whitmore dinners. Volunteers carried boxes of books through the front entrance. Someone taped a crooked sign near the staircase that read, "Welcome home." Clara stood in the drawing room, now lined with shelves, and watched a teenage girl settle into the emerald green chair Clara had donated because it looked better there than in her apartment. The girl opened a book and tucked her feet beneath her. Sunlight fell across the carpet. Sophia came to stand beside Clara. You okay? Clara looked toward the fireplace. For a second, she saw Andrew holding the torn gift. She heard laughter. She felt the old heat of shame. Then the vision faded beneath the sound of children arguing about board games in the next room. Yes, she said, I'm okay. At the opening ceremony, Clara had planned to say very little. She hated speeches. She disliked attention. But when Sophia introduced her, people clapped and Clara found herself standing at the front of the room with a microphone in her hand, facing neighbors, students, former Whitmore employees, city officials, and a few reporters. In the back, Henry stood with his cap in his hands. Margaret was not there. Andrew was not there. Richard was gone. But somehow, Clara felt surrounded by all the truths that had brought her to that moment. She took a breath. I used to think a home was a place where you were allowed to stay, she began. Then I learned that staying is not the same as belonging. Some rooms can be beautiful and still make you small. Some tables can be full and still leave you hungry. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is walk out of a door without knowing what waits on the other side. The room quieted. This house was once a symbol of one family's name. Today, it becomes something better. A place where names matter less than futures. A place where children can learn, families can gather, and no one has to earn dignity by being useful to someone powerful. She looked at the students in the front row. If you remember anything from today, remember this. Never let anyone confuse your gentleness for emptiness. Never let someone else's inability to value you become your measure of worth. You are not small because someone needed to feel tall beside you. You are not silent because you have nothing to say. And if the day comes when you must leave a place that refuses to see you, leave knowing you carry more with you than you ever left behind. Applause rose slowly, then fully. Clara lowered the microphone, overwhelmed. Sophia hugged her. Henry wiped his eyes. A little girl offered Clara a paper crown decorated with blue stars. "I made this for you," the girl said. Clara knelt. "It's beautiful. You can wear it if you want." Clara looked at the fragile paper crown, repaired in one place with too much tape. She thought of the boy and girl in the playground months earlier. She thought of broken things made whole not by hiding the tear, but by tending to it. "I would be honored," Clara said. The girl placed it carefully on her head. People laughed kindly, and someone took a photo. Clara did not feel embarrassed. She felt light. That evening, after everyone left, Clara walked alone through the house. The dining room tables were covered with notebooks and welcome packets. The kitchen smelled of soup from the culinary students' first practice meal. The old bedrooms upstairs had become counseling offices, art rooms, and quiet spaces for tutoring. At the end of the mirrored hallway, only one mirror remained, too large to remove without damaging the wall. Clara stood before it. For years, that mirror had shown her a woman trying to disappear elegantly. Tonight it showed a woman in a navy dress, a paper crown, and eyes that no longer asked permission. She smiled, not the old smile she had used to survive, but a real one, uneven and free. Outside, the river moved through the city, dark and constant. Clara stepped onto the front porch. The air smelled of leaves and distant rain. She remembered the night she had left this house with water soaking through her shoes, humiliation burning behind her ribs, and no idea that the secret she carried would change everything. But the money had not been the real secret. The shares, the trust, the hidden power, those were only papers, numbers, tools. The real secret was the woman Andrew had never bothered to know. A woman who listened. A woman who remembered. A woman who could be gentle without being weak. A woman who finally understood that being underestimated was not the same as being powerless. Clara locked the door behind her and placed the key in Sophia's hand the next morning. The house belonged to the community now. Her marriage belonged to the past. Her father's legacy belonged to the future. And her life, at last, belonged to her. Years later, people would tell the story in different ways. Some would say Clara Whitmore destroyed her husband after he insulted her at dinner. Some would say she saved a company from corruption. Some would say she turned a mansion into a refuge because kindness had always been her nature. The newspapers preferred the simplest version. Humiliated wife returns with secret fortune. It was dramatic. It was clickable. It was not entirely wrong. But those who knew Clara understood the truth was quieter. She had not returned to prove she was rich. She had returned to prove she was real. And sometimes, when the center stayed open late and the younger children had gone home, Clara would sit in the old drawing room library while teenagers studied around her. Rain would tap the windows, soft as memory. She would open Captain Moore's journal and read the line Richard had marked in pencil before he died. A ship does not discover its strength in the harbor, but in the storm that teaches it what it can survive. Clara would look around the room, at the students bent over their books, at the paper crowns pinned to the bulletin board, at the compass resting in a glass case near the door. Then she would close the journal and listen to the rain without fear. Because once, a storm had carried her out of a house that never loved her. And in the morning after, she had found her way home.